Its name sufficiently indicates to what order it belongs. It is Jesuitism, put within the reach of its labouring classes, and you may recognise it by the cleverness of its arrangements. The workmen, of which it consists almost exclusively, are disposed in sections of tens, hundreds and thousands, with leaders to each section. The avowed purpose of the society is to secure invalid workmen, who, for a subscription of 5 sous a month, or 3 francs a year, are insured medical aid and 25 sous a day in sickness. Such are the outward rules of the society, but in reality its design is clerical and legitimist. The two influences are here blended together in one common aim. Another and perhaps a more dangerous means of action is the vast boarding school which the brethren of the Christian schools, under the supreme control of the Rue Salah, have established at Fauvières. This gigantic establishment, which can accommodate upwards of 400 interns, was founded about 8 years prior in defiance of all the universitary laws. Its object, which is distinct from that of the small seminaries, is to give young men of the middle and inferior trading classes a sort of professional education, comprising, with the exception of the dead languages, all the branches taught in colleges. The complete course of study embraces no less than 8 years. In this institution, as in all others of its kind, the domestic arrangements are excellent and the instructions indifferent, being imparted by the brethren. Masters fit only to teach little children their catechism, instruct adults in the highest branches of rhetoric, philosophy, and the physical and mathematical sciences. In consequence too of the continual removes of each of the brethren of the doctrine to and from all parts of France. Any able professors who may have been formed in Lyons are seen appointed directors in some other town, and the system of teaching in the institution, however high in appearance, does not in reality rise above a very humble level. The annual charge is as low as possible, not exceeding 550 francs, which barely covers the indispensable expenses. This low rate of charge, cited by the all-potent influence of the confessional over mothers of families, attracts to the institution multitudes of lads of the middle class. As for the children of the poor, they belong of right to the schools of the doctrine, the primitive destination of the order, and one in which it can render real services. But this is not all. One of the centres of the Christian schools being placed at Lyons, there was requisite a novitiate house, and the order had just procured one by purchasing for 250,000 francs a magnificent property at Calvaire, within a league of Lyons. The vendor allowed 10 years for the discharge of the purchase money, but the whole was paid within 18 months, and a vast edifice, capable, which, when complete, of accommodating more than 400 resident pupils, has risen out of the earth as if by enchantment. The estimate made by the engineer who directed the works and who is a member of the society amounted, it is said, to 1.5 million of francs, and it has been exceeded. So they've got much more out of it. As for the lesser seminaries, of which there are many in the dioceses, they will only mention that of Argentière, which contains 500 pupils, and that of Meximieux, which has 200. Hence, we may form an approximate idea of the immense action on education exercised in these parts by the clergy, in flagrant contravention of the university laws and regulations. The low charges of the institutions, not to mention many supplementary burses, give it the additional attraction of cheapness, and for those very low charges, about 400 francs, the Jesuit schools are supposed to afford their pupils instruction in all those branches of knowledge, Greek and Latin included, which are taught in those gulfs of perdition which are called colleges. On the whole, we may reckon at the number of 100 the religious establishments intended, whether for the education of both sexes or for the relief of the distressed. All the suburbs of Lyons have their nunneries, and monastic garbs of every form and colour swarm in the streets. The Capuchins, however, who were formerly found there, have migrated to Villebon, and the Jesuits, jealous of any rivals of their supremacy here, are said to have purchased their retirement at the cost of 900,000 francs. If you are astonished at the immense sums which the clergy here dispose of, recollect that one individual, Mademoiselle de la Balmondier, the last scion of a noble family, has left the church a sum of 10 millions, of which the Archbishop has been named supreme dispenser. Through the confession by means of the woman, and by all kinds of influence, direct and indirect, the clergy keeps the whole male population in a state of obsession and blockade. A trader who should revolt against this influence would instantly provoke against him the whole clerical host, and would be stripped of his credit and put under a sort of moral interdiction that would end in his ruin. The university, which possesses at Lyon some distinguished men, a brilliant faculty, and an excellent royal college, is put in the archiepiscopal index, and what here as elsewhere is called freedom of teaching, that is to say, the power of taking education entirely out of lay hands and committing it to corporations, is the object of all the prayers of pious souls here, and of all the combined efforts of the archbishopric and the Rue Sala. The Jesuits, this is 4, the Jesuits have shown themselves in their true colours in Switzerland, where, merciless as ever, they chose rather to provoke the horrors of civil war than to yield, as the Christian spirit enjoined them. They have thereby augmented the hatred and contempt with which they are regarded on all sides. So sure were they of victory that in their infatuation they disdained to take the most ordinary precautions. Apropos of the Jesuits, said the Swiss correspondent of the National at that period, it will be well to give you some account of the documents which most deeply compromised the Reverend Fathers and their allies, both in Switzerland and in other countries. It will be seen whether or not the presence of the order is extremely dangerous to the countries that afford them an asylum. In the first place, there has been discovered at Fribourg a catalogue in Latin of all the establishments which the Jesuits possess in a portion of France and Switzerland, with a list and the address of all the persons connected with them. This person said they sent him 2 numbers of a Swiss journal in which there was an abstract of this catalogue drawn up with the greatest care, and he'd perceived from it that the Jesuit houses had greatly augmented in number in France since the Pope made a show of promising M. Rossi and M. Guzot that they should have no more establishments in your country. The chambers will see how their demands have been derided. France will learn how she is duped and what is the occult power that rules the government. For proof of all this, I refer you to the analysis of the famous catalogue, which you will not fail to publish. And there's 2 other documents, etc., etc. And he goes further into that. So, by the sounds of it, they basically took over everything. And they were like very hard on people, and so forth. They limited people, traders, etc., etc. And then they had some sort of journal, the universe, strangely mistaking the age, and promulgated plenty of miracles to sanctify the cause of the Jesuits in July. The abominable fraud had not been able to remain concealed. The press held up its perpetrators to contempt, and they've proved it for 1,000th time that this order, continually urged by infernal ambition, meditates the ruin of all liberty, and by its counsellors hurrying princes, nobles, and states to their ruin. It is suggested that they petrify the heart of the kings of Naples, and so forth. Lately, there was the captain of St. Helena expressing his whole opinion of this order. But be it remembered in the first place that it is not for the sake of right and reason Napoleon declares himself an enemy to Jesuitism. He feared reason. Right he deemed a thing not to be realised. As for liberty, he could never comprehend it. Louis XIV, he exclaimed, the greatest sovereign France has had. He and I, that is all. He even thought that the people should not be allowed the Bible. In China, said he, the people worship their sovereign as a god, and so it should be. Now he felt strong enough to, as he says, to make the Pope his tool and Catholicism a means of his power. He liked the latter because it enjoins men to distrust their reason and believe blindly. The Catholic religion is the best of all because it speaks to the eyes of the multitude and aids the constituted authority. In another place, Napoleon said he preferred it because it is an all-potent auxiliary and royalty. He admitted all sorts of monks and thought he could make something of them, except the Jesuits. On his rock he speaks of them with nothing but abhorrence, and is convinced that he could not resist them with more profound or more decisive means than their own, and that whatever they exert, such is the force of their stratagems and manoeuvres, that they rule and master everything in a manner unknown to everybody. But, says he, a very dangerous society, and one which would never have been admitted on the soil of the empire, is that of the Jesuits. Its doctrines are subversive of all monarchical principles. The general of the Jesuits insists on being sovereign master, sovereign over the sovereign. Whether the Jesuits are admitted, they will be masters, cost what it may. Their society is by nature dictatorial, and therefore it is the irreconcilable enemy of all constituted authority. Every act, every crime, however atrocious, is a meritorious work if it is committed for the interest of the Society of Jesus, or by order of the General of the Jesuits. Footnote indicated there. It has a reference to a certain book. It's like in the French, it might be something like Recital of a Captive, and so forth. Page 294. The first step in the reform of Catholicism is the absolute abolition of this order. So as long as it subsists, it will exert anti-social and anti-Christian influence over the Church and the powers, and so as long as the Church is filled with the hatred for progress which that order cherishes, it will only hasten its own decay, and its regeneration will be impossible. It won't be able to recover. And here's a secret plan of the Jesuits, part 1. No, vitiate an ecclesiastical career. No, vitiate an ecclesiastical career. And it continues with the horrificness of the Jesuit order. In chapter 3 here it says this person set out to go somewhere accordingly. On his arrival, they placed in his hands, the Jesuits placed in his hands, the rules which related to this first phases of his new existence. He was immediately initiated into the exercises of Saint Ignatius and of other saints, all Jesuits.